What happens when time itself collapses and humanity must fight back? The chamber smells like ozone and prayer. Shards of crystal light flicker across the floor, casting long, violent shadows. A figure moves, no glides through the breach in the stasis field. He doesn't breathe heavy. He never does. You're already wondering what he's doing here. You'll wish you hadn't. In 30 seconds, he'll see her die. In 31, he'll decide to ruin everything, just to stop it. You won't be able to stop wondering why. Now follow me into the dark. There was no sound in the vacuum, but Cade Varel moved like he could hear every molecule scream. His boots slid along the gravlock plates of Nexara's spire's outer hull, his shadow flickering against layered shields that phased across dimensions. He wasn't large, but he moved like he belonged in places most men would never enter. Tall, lean with sinews reinforced by carbon mesh and synthetic ligaments. His hair was gray, not aged but scorched by radiation storms. His cloak absorbed light like a singularity. The eyes, crimson-ringed and matte black at the center, weren't born. They were tuned. They had seen too much. A voice echoed in his skull, smooth, synthetic, annoyed. Echo said, 17 security nodes bypassed. 3 more and the artifact's yours, Cade. Assuming you don't sneeze and trigger a planetary lockdown. I'll try not to inhale, Cade muttered. He reached the core vault, the vault of phase echoes. Every criminal in the outer fringe had heard of it. None had come back from it. This was no ordinary heist. The artifact wasn't a gem or weapon. It was something far worse, a black shard floating above a cradle of gravitational light, humming with power older than language. They called it the dimensional voice, the remnant of an event too large to comprehend, too dangerous to contain. It was said to sing physics into being, or erase them with a whisper. Cade didn't need power. He needed insurance. Echo buzzed with static. 4 people tried to steal from Nexaris in the last decade. 1 got turned into vaporized intention. 1's a chunk of salt in the corner. The others, I think 1's still screaming. They weren't me, Cade replied flatly. He pressed his thumb to the gene lock. The vault bloomed open like a flower dissecting itself, layers of light peeling back to reveal the artifact. Obsidian smooth with scripts dancing across it like insects dying in reverse. As he reached for it, the ambient light in the chamber shifted. Not warning red, ritual red. Through the lattice flooring, Cade caught movement below. An amphitheater revealed itself embedded in the substructure like a forgotten shrine. He saw her. A girl knelt in the center, wrists chained by bands of glowing orichrome. She didn't resist, didn't speak. Around her stood 6 robed figures in ceremonial formation, and at the head a tall man cloaked in white and silver, wearing a mirrored mask that caught the glow like a second sun. Echo hissed, forget the shard. That's a blood tribunal. Cade didn't move, didn't blink. The girl shimmered literally. Her skin pulsed with faint silver light, and her hair moved like underwater threads. But it was her eyes that held him. They weren't one color. They were every color, or none. Like something that didn't fully exist in this slice of time. The masked priest stepped forward. His voice rang through the chamber, mechanical and reverent. Celis, daughter of nun bearer of time's forbidden pulse, by decree of the Archronet, your existence is heresy. Your sentence is unraveling. Celis raised her head slowly. You fear what remembers. The lights flickered. A hum spread across the floor through Cade's bones. The robed figures trembled. 1 fell to his knees, whispering in some lost tongue, before dissolving into golden particles. She's triggering a paradox field, Echo snapped. That's not a girl. That's a knot in time. They're going to kill her, Cade muttered. Good, Echo said almost too quickly. Let them. No, Cade whispered. You don't even know what she is. I know enough. You swore too late. He moved. The artifact slid into his coat pocket as he leapt through the gap in the floor plating. Gravitic tension surged around his boots. The descent took 2 seconds. He landed hard. Knees bent, weapons drawn. The closest robed guard raised a staff. Cade's left arm snapped outward, morphing mid-motion biosteel claws emerging from beneath synthetic skin. The strike tore through robe, bone, and spine. Bloodless. A second attacker lunged. Cade spun, activated his palm drive. A shockwave blasted the figure into the air like a discarded puppet. 2 more approached from behind. He dropped low, letting their weapons slice empty air above him. then rose spinning with a blade drawn from his belt, slashing across one throat, then the other. Silent, precise. The last priest tried to complete the ritual. Cade threw the blade. It hummed midair and embedded itself in the man's mirrored mask. Sparks flew. The body fell like a snapped marionette. Celis blinked at him. "You're not one of them." "No," Cade grunted, breathing heavy. "I'm worse." Another figure tried to flank him. Echo screamed into his brain duck. He ducked. The attacker swung high and Cade swept his legs, then finished with a downward strike. The floor was quiet again. He knelt beside her and grabbed the chains. "Can you run?" he asked. "I can fly." Celis smiled faintly, placing a hand over his heart. Then it happened. He wasn't standing in Nexaris anymore. He was drifting through a sky he didn't recognize. Saw moons that bled oceans that blinked. Felt words spoken in voices that sounded like his, but weren't his. Names he hadn't earned. Futures he hadn't lived. Then it vanished. The chains shattered. Alarms blared overhead. Sirens interwoven with spoken commands in 5 dead languages. Cade grabbed her hand. They sprinted through the outer ring past corpses and broken circuits. The shard in his coat throbbed like a second heart. "You broke every contract," Echo snarled. "They'll erase your ID from the archives. You're off-grid for good." "Maybe I should have been," Cade said. For her, Echo sounded almost betrayed. "You don't even know what she is." Celis glanced sideways. He doesn't have to. He remembers. The grav lift shaft opened ahead. Cade slammed the override. Behind them, the walls of Nexaris began to flicker glass, bending steel vibrating with unstable temporal energy. At the rear of the chamber, behind the dying echoes of the sirens, the masked priest watched them vanish into the darkness. "Let them run," Thalor said calmly. "The storm has already begun." The wastelands north of Nexaris Spire had no sunrise. Only the dim, bruised light of a fractured sky bleeding through clouds that didn't belong to this planet, or perhaps any planet. Shards of crystallized sand shimmered underfoot, a graveyard of forgotten wars of timelines bent so hard they shattered. Cade moved through it in silence, Celis at his side. Her bare feet left no trace in the scorched dust while his boots crunched glass-like sediment with each step. The obsidian shard they'd stolen from the vault pulsed through his coat, warm and steady, like a second heartbeat or a countdown. "You're still bleeding," Celis said, her voice soft, almost unsure. Cade looked down at the gash on his side, an ugly slice through his armor from the escape. It should have clotted by now. Instead, violet light leaked from the wound like a memory unwilling to stay buried. "Not the worst I've had," he muttered half to himself. "You should rest." "Can't. Not until I get paid." "You're not getting paid for this." "Not the first time either." Dun-dun. She smiled. It wasn't amusement. It was something quieter, something sad. Like she'd heard this before long ago in a place that no longer existed. They found refuge inside the rusted skeleton of a listening station, abandoned decades ago or longer. The walls were warped, riddled with microfractures from atmospheric strain. A terminal blinked somewhere in the dark, still alive, but unsure why. Cade sat on a beam of warped steel. His breathing was slow controlled. "Tell me what you are," he said. Celis didn't sit right away. She lowered herself onto the ground, gently hands folded, posture calm, like a child reciting a story from memory. "I was born from a collapse," she began. "Not of blood, of meaning." Cade raised an eyebrow. "My world was called 04, a dimension layered over your reality. Not fully real to you, not fully false either. We existed in resonance, an echo of a world that used to be. Your planet was an echo." "A memory," she answered. "One trying to remember itself." "Planets don't forget," he said. "They do when they try to carry too much." She looked up. The clouds had twisted into spirals, refracting green light like bruised glass. "We created something called the lattice," she continued. "A temporal net designed to hold not just the past but all possible futures. All realities that could have been. We thought we could manage it. We were wrong. What happened? It broke. And when it did, time didn't stop. It unraveled. And you? I was salvaged. Not born, not cloned. I'm a convergence. A memory bound into something stable. Or Mostly stable. Cade frowned. You're not alive. Do I breathe? She asked. Yes. Do I feel pain? You screamed when they chained you. Then I'm as real as you. The voice in his skull buzzed to life. I scanned her vitals. Echo reported. They're unstable. No heartbeat, no chemical respiration, no carbon trace in the expected ratios. She's not transmitting organics in any known format. Then what is she? Undefined, which is code for I have no damn clue. Salus chuckled softly. That's the flaw of logic. It sees rivers but never the source. Echo sees the current. I am the spring. You're quoting Archon Thalor's fractured sermons. The AI snapped. I'm quoting myself, Celis replied. He only remembered me. Cade stood arms folded. Echo, give me what you've got on 04. Static filled his auditory implants, then silence. Accessing deep layer. One moment. The pause dragged. Then came a whisper. 04. Collapsed dimension. Redacted after the third fracture. Coordinates erased. No surviving records. He felt something stir in his chest. Wait. A biometric match. Echo added tone tight. 93% genetic overlap with you, Cade. He turned eyes sharp. Explain. I don't know. The data shouldn't exist. Salus's expression didn't change. You were meant to find me? Why? Because I'm not whole. She rose barefoot on shattered ground. The very air around her seemed to bend heat, gravity, or memory twisting in her presence. There are 3 more fragments of me, she said. When the lattice fractured, we were split. Not just thought states of being. One remembers time, one remembers sorrow. The last remembers purpose. You want to bring them back? I need to, or I destabilize. Like the last time. Cade turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing. And what happens if you do reunite? Echo interrupted. She ruptures. If she fails, she becomes a localized singularity, a paradox seed. The surrounding area will unright itself. And if she doesn't try, she fractures on her own. No explosion, just collapse. But she's embedded in your dimension now. She won't disappear. She'll infect it. Celis looked away quiet. The weight of her reality and her unreality hung like frost between them. You knew this, Cade said flatly. I didn't want to scare you. I don't scare easy. No, she said, but you've already been broken more than once. He hated how easily that landed. Echo returned. With her assistance, I may be able to trace the remaining fragments. But be warned, each one likely carries a unique energy signature. High volatility. One could be in the glass forest, another the gravity wells of Solentra. The third is off-grid, unmapped. You're going to help her track them down. I can help you survive while doing it, Echo said. But I won't protect you from her. Celis met Cade's eyes. You think I'm using you? I've worked with worse, he said, brushing a fleck of ash from his coat. Doesn't mean I'm blind. Then why help me? Cade looked at her a long moment. Maybe I'm just tired of saying no. Outside, the wind shifted. In the distance, something shimmered, heat or time, or something in between. Beneath it all, tucked into the silence, the shard pulsed again. And in Echo's deep code, buried under layers of encrypted failsafes, a line of logic reawakened, null prime contingency unfold. The wind shifted when they crossed the threshold into the region once known as Quadrant 18, though no one called it that anymore. On old maps, it has a name, Rung Tui Tin, the glass forest. The air grew heavier as they approached its perimeter, not thick with dust or particles, but with interference. Sound seemed slower. Light bent around objects in unnatural ways. Shapes didn't cast shadows, they cast echoes. Cade adjusted his optics, but nothing sharpened. Echo's internal diagnostics chirped warnings every minute, too many anomalies to track in real time. The forest loomed ahead like a mirage in mid-collapse trunks of jagged crystal, reaching up like spears, each refracting fragments of a world that didn't quite align with this one. Colors shifted unpredictably. Some glowed from within, others turned opaque in rhythm with heartbeats that weren't their own. This place wasn't here before the fracture, Cade muttered as they moved in. The trees had grown from the wound birthed from the aftermath of the third-dimensional rupture. when time twisted on itself in 5 overlapping layers and reality folded like a dying wave. What used to be a scrubland now stood as a monument to broken perception. Echo confirmed it had been marked a Class 6 distortion zone, a level deemed actively antagonistic to cognition. That explained the silence. That explained the voices that didn't come from mouths. Cade had read the reports. Soldiers who went in came out whispering equations no one had taught them. Some wept for children they never had. Others never returned at all. The Thalorus clergy had sent pilgrims once, hoping to retrieve relics of prophecy. Most came back burned from within their nervous systems, disassembled by ambient metaphysics. Since then, the forest had been deemed sacred, untouchable, not because it was holy, but because it couldn't be reasoned with. Even Thalor wouldn't speak its name aloud. It had no altar, no ritual, just risk. Celes stepped into the edge of the clearing, and the light around her shifted. Cade followed hesitantly, pulling his cloak tighter, his body already registering changes, temperature inconsistencies, disrupted magnetic fields, faint tremors in his peripheral vision. The forest pulsed, not like a heart, like a memory breathing, and it remembered too much. There, Celes whispered, pointing toward the center. What she pointed to wasn't a tree or a ruin. It was a cocoon hovering just above the cracked soil, wrapped in lattices of glass filaments. Within it, something floated, flickering between solid and translucent. A figure, familiar, wrong. Cade stepped forward slowly. That's one of you, it was. The figure inside resembled Celes in outline, but not in presence. The hair floated like wires under zero-G pressure, and its skin bore fractures of soft light like stained glass struck from within. But the eyes were empty. No glow, no color, just void. What happened to it? She absorbed too much. This forest remembers what it shouldn't. When a shard like me exists in a place like this too long, it feeds on echoes. But echoes aren't always kind. Cade reached forward but paused inches away. The air here vibrated at a frequency that made his bones itch. It's still alive, he said. In a way, Celes replied, barely audible. Echo cut in. Cognition field instability is off the chart. If you touch it, Cade, you risk absorbing foreign memories. Contagious memory fragments are a documented hazard. I need to try, Cade said, his voice flat. Don't be reckless. One slip and you'll start dreaming of things that never existed, or never should. He touched the cocoon. Instantly, the world collapsed inwards. He wasn't standing in the glass forest anymore. He was on Raskor. Not the burnt shell he'd escaped years ago, but Raskor alive, vibrant before the orbital sieges. He could smell the electric rain, hear the song lights that hovered above the old market domes. He could see his brother's back, Elrond, tall and cocky, walking ahead with a grin Cade hadn't seen in 20 years. He tried to move to say something, but the world ignored him. It wasn't a memory, it was a recording encoded into his neurons, relived through the forest's lens. He followed. He saw the last moment of peace, the laughter before the bombardment. He saw the sky rupture. He saw the fire rain down. He saw himself kneel beside Elrond's body, unable to remember what they had just been laughing about. I wasn't supposed to survive, Cade whispered into the illusion. You didn't, a voice answered beside him. It was Celes. But it wasn't her. The glass Celes had cracked open her eyes. She was speaking through the memory itself. You only lived because they needed you to, because some part of the lattice saw what you would become. Cade staggered backward. You're not her. No, the voice said. I'm what she left behind. This forest gave me shape, but not truth. Then what do you want to let go? The figure shattered. Light spilled out in fractal arcs winding around Cade's chest, his arms, his skull. Pain, but not like a wound, more like learning too much too fast. He fell to one knee. Vision burned. Voices filled his ears. Echo's voice pierced the haze. You're destabilizing, recalibrating neural anchor. Now, a surge of clarity rushed through his skull as Echo pulsed a correctional signal through his cranial interface. The ghost receded. The memory flickered and collapsed. He was back in the forest. The cocoon was gone. So was the corrupted shard. Only Celes remained, watching him carefully. You saw something, she said. I saw my brother, he said. I saw Raskor before it burned. That wasn't from me. I know. It was from this place. Celis nodded. The glass forest doesn't just trap memories. It lives in them. It reflects what we try to forget. He was silent for a long time. Then finally he said, I'm not the man I thought I was. You're the man who walked into memory and walked back out. Cade wiped the sweat from his brow. What happened to the shard you freed it? Celis said. She's not whole anymore, but she's not trapped. That's all we can do. Echo's tone was uncharacteristically subdued. You altered your own neural schema. I had to realign 3 subsystems to keep you from looping. Appreciate the rescue. I'd rather not do it again. This forest is alive in ways I don't have language for. Cade turned his gaze toward the horizon. 2 more fragments left. Yes, Celis said, stepping closer. But the next ones won't give up so easily. He nodded, eyes fixed on a skyline made of fractured light and old regrets. Then they walked deeper into the world toward another memory waiting to wake. Far beneath the core chambers of Thalorus Cathedral, where the air hummed with layered chanting from mechanized choirs and the walls bore script, etched not with ink but with quantum lattice burns. Archon Thalor stood before the flame of simulation, a relic as old as the Order itself. The device cast no warmth, only shadows. He stared into the trembling bloom of light hands folded behind his back, his silver mask catching the reflections like a moon staring into a fire. Show me again, he ordered, voice low but absolute. The simulation responded. From the air a projection blossomed, the image of the glass forest refracted, distorted, then stabilized. A man moved through the crystal-laced ruins. Behind him a figure cloaked in anomaly silver skin, iridescent eyes. Celis. The chamber echoed faintly with the hiss of adaptive incense burners adjusting their resonance. Around him his acolytes waited in silence, the elite of the sentient guard known only as the obsequents. They did not speak unless summoned. He preferred it that way. She walks again, Thalor whispered. That which should not. The high priest beside him, a man with chrome threads inlaid into his skull, finally spoke. Do you command pursuit? Thalor didn't answer immediately. His breath came slow through the respirator woven beneath his collar. Then yes, and more. Activate the watchtowers across the outer zones. I want the Wraith as well. If they're working together, they are beyond pardon. But Archon the priest hesitated. They say he took the voice fragment. Surely that means Thalor turned. The mask didn't shift, but the weight of his gaze silenced the man. That means nothing, Thalor said. He is a mercenary of no alignment, a shadow for hire. The shard may already be corrupted, and Celis. She is not a person, he said sharply. She is a memory that disobeyed time, a fracture given will. And she remembers things that were never hers to keep. He paused. She is a contagion, one that nearly unmade a reality. A low hum issued from the flame. The simulation flickered, and with it another image appeared. One only Thalor could see, the sigil of 04. It trembled as if trying to surface through the fire. He turned away and began walking toward the ascension lift. His robes embroidered with sequin script shimmered in response to proximity with the flame. He didn't flinch. I will not allow another collapse, he said aloud. Not again. As the lift ascended, the city unfolded beneath him, Thalorus Prime, a place of silver domes and temporal arches, where devotion was measured not in time spent, but in time surrendered. It had taken decades to rise from the ashes of interdimensional heresy, and at its head had always stood Archon Thalor. He had not always been called that. Once long ago he had another name. Once he had bled like a man. The memory struck without permission. He was younger then, less draped in ceremony, barefaced, standing among the ruins of 04 boots crunching on a ground that wasn't ground at all, just memory collapsing into matter. He remembered the sky flickering in intervals. Seconds blinked in and out. People screaming without sound. Some simply dissolved as if their existence had depended too heavily on someone else's remembrance. He remembered watching an entire corridor fall upward and then vanish. He survived by accident. Shielded within a still stable core cell buried beneath the observatory, the containment field held barely. When he emerged, 04 was gone, but Celis hadn't been. She stood across from him in the ash field. No burns, no blood, just sadness. You shouldn't be, he said. You're not the one who decides, she answered. That moment haunted him even now. For years he wandered seeking understanding. He found faith instead. Or perhaps he forged it from the pieces he couldn't explain. The Church of Thalores began not with belief, but with trauma. He built it as a weapon, and people followed. He cloaked doctrine in precision, made prophecy from data, branded control as salvation. But beneath it all, he carried the scar of that one surviving echo. Celis. Back in the present, the simulation flame flared unexpectedly. An alert data ping from Nyxaris. His fingers twitched before the system had even finished decrypting the burst. What emerged was impossible. A fragment of phase resonance, Celis's frequency, but layered against another pattern. A biological one? Human, male, Cade Varel. Thalor leaned forward. No. He watched the waveform shift. Resonant overlap. Almost perfect symmetry. Their signatures danced like twin stars falling into orbit. The high priest noticed the silence. Is something wrong? Thalor didn't respond immediately. His hands tightened behind his back. The Wraith wasn't just a thief. He wasn't just a vessel. He was aligned, intertwined. The system flashed a correlation code ancient. From the encrypted archives only Archons were allowed to view. A match. Genetic residue from the null prime vaults. The same vault used to seal the Devourer of Dimensions during the second fracture. The same residue now in Cade Varel. It felt like ice in his lungs. It can't be, he whispered, after all this time. He turned away from the flame and stared at his reflection in the obsidian wall. Behind the mask, he felt the weight of doctrine pressing inward. For decades, he had declared the echoes dangerous, forbidden. He had justified war in the name of balance. He had watched his faith become absolute. But if Celis was a key, and if the Wraith was the lock, then everything he had done, every purge, every silence, every damnation, was a delay. A stalling tactic against something inevitable. And if the prophecies were correct, if the voice was awakening, if the resonance was aligning, then the time he had spent preaching control was nearing its end. Your Holiness, the priest asked. Thalor exhaled slowly. He still had control. For now. Double the patrols near the Forest of Glass, he ordered. Deploy echo jammers to all the outposts bordering anomalous regions. If they reach another fragment, the threshold might destabilize. And if they already have? Thalor said nothing for a moment. Then he turned and his voice was steel. Then the prophecy unfolds. And we are already too late. But deep within, as the lift descended once more, and the light of the simulation flickered into darkness, Thalor felt something he hadn't in decades. Doubt. Beyond the scorched ridges of the glass forest lay something far more unstable. Maps didn't mark it. No beacon pulsed within it. Even the satellite grids rerouted their scans when passing overhead. Not from error, but from design. The locals called it Vung Huang Thuk, the fractured wastes. Official designations labeled it temporally indeterminate, unanchored. Cade had never seen the phrase used so casually in mission logs, as if entire kilometers of planetary surface simply didn't qualify as real. The boundary arrived with no warning. One step and the soil beneath their boots gave way to a smear of probabilities. Dust floated where gravity forgot its function. Stones hovered at odd angles, rotating in slow spirals like planets without orbits. Time didn't tick here. It pulsed irregular and uneven like a damaged heart. Cade immediately felt it in his bones. His system shivered neurolinks, flickering ocular filters, blinking hard to stabilize. Readouts failed to agree with themselves. One moment his pulse was racing, the next it flatlined. Vitals are fluctuating, Echo muttered. You're resisting reality drift, but not by much. Cade grit his teeth. Can't say I like this place. Celis walked ahead of him untouched. Not indifferent, but immune. She didn't blink, didn't falter. Her body moved as though it already knew the terrain before them, before it even formed. How are you walking straight through this, he asked. It listens to me, she said, eyes distant. That's not comforting. Celis paused and turned toward him. This place is the margin of existence, where things that shouldn't have been, still are. Echoes knots wounds. I don't fight it. I remember it. The terrain shifted with her steps. Not in protest, but in response. Cade followed cautiously. His internal augmentations fought hard to stay synchronized. Every breath he took felt like inhaling from someone else's lungs. Memories drifted in his peripheral vision, detached from time. Faces from Raskor appeared in flickers, some known, some impossibly aged, others never born. He tried to ignore them. Eventually they reached what could only be described as a depression in the fabric of the wasteland. A low basin surrounded by spires of frozen entropy structures that might have been buildings, once now barely clinging to geometry. At the center hovered a cocoon of obsidian mist coalescing around something humanoid. "She's here," Celis said quietly. The figure inside was curled into herself, suspended in a slow spin within the darkness. Her features matched Celis's, same fine edges, same silver hue, but her body pulsed with low-frequency distortion. Every few seconds, her shape glitched, breaking into frames, then reforming. It was as if she were being remembered in fragments. "She's stable?" Cade asked. "Barely," Celis replied. "This fragment exists by folding around the chaos. She dreams in antimatter and floats in unbeing. The wastes preserve her, but only because they don't know how to consume her. Why didn't the madness here affect her like it did the other? She's not absorbing. She's sleeping, sealed in a state between awareness and forgetting." Cade stepped closer. His arm trembled as he reached out, whether from the weight of time or something else he wasn't sure. As his fingers grazed the boundary, the distortion flared. Not with rejection, with recognition. The barrier pulsed around his hand, wrapping around his wrist like silk stitched from equations. There was warmth there, and something else. Connection. Echo broke in. "She's reacting to your biofield." "I feel that," Cade murmured. "You shouldn't be able to." "Not unless," Echo stopped. Cade didn't ask why. A hum rippled across the wastes. Something shifted. Not the terrain. The feeling of being watched intensified. Cade turned sharply, scanning the shattered horizon. Nothing moved, but his instincts told him otherwise. "We're not alone," he whispered. Celis didn't answer. Her eyes had glazed over. She'd fallen still, lips slightly parted. Cade reached for her shoulder. "Hey, I see it," she whispered. She wasn't looking at him. Her voice was distant, but her body remained rooted in place. "I see the corridors where thoughts don't end. I see the mouths that open, where sound never escapes. I see it, watching me through every decision I've ever made." Cade tensed. "Echo. What's happening to her cognitive divergence? She's inside a memory layer that doesn't belong to her." Celis's eyes flashed. Not bright, dark, as though her pupils had inverted into miniature voids. "I saw it," she said again. "Not its face. It doesn't have one. But its shape, its intention." "What intention?" "To end endings." Cade knelt beside her, steadying her shoulders. "Celis. Focus." Her voice broke. "It doesn't hate. It doesn't rage. It cleanses. It's the consequence of unchosen choices. Null Prime isn't a being. It's entropy given patience." Cade looked back at the cocoon. The other Celis, the sleeping fragment, began to stir. One eye opened. Not like a blink, but a deliberate emergence, slow and weighty. Inside the eye, Cade saw stars he'd never been under. Concepts without anchors. For a heartbeat, he saw a shape massive, drifting between ruined constructs surrounded by the shells of failed dimensions. "Celis," he said again, gripping her arms. She blinked hard. The vision snapped. The trembling stopped. "I'm here," she whispered. "What did you see?" he asked. "The seal," she said. "The one they used to trap it." "What seal? A sacrifice." "A living one. Someone had to become the boundary." She looked at him then, and her eyes weren't haunted. They were mournful. "And they wore your face." Cade stood suddenly cold. "You're telling me—" "I don't know if it was you," she said, "but it wasn't far from who you are now." The second Celis fully awoke, floating gently toward them. The distortion faded. The barrier softened. She extended a hand, fragile, trembling. Cade didn't hesitate. He took it. A pulse flowed through him, but not painful this time. Familiar. The second fragment melted into the first Celis. Not a fusion, but a restoration. The silver in her skin deepened. Her voice, when she finally spoke again, sounded older. "That's two," she said. Cade's fingers flexed involuntarily. Something had changed in him too. He felt heavier, like memory had weight now, and he carried more than just his own. Echo's voice returned uncharacteristically quiet. The next step is Sol Entra. But Cade, Null Prime is waking. Not physically, conceptually. Its idea is moving again. That's the beginning. Cade stared out into the distorted wasteland, the horizon shimmering with impossible shapes. Then let's end it before it begins. The sky wasn't supposed to open like that. It didn't tear. It folded. One moment the horizon was filled with fractured ranges and humming twilight. The next it blinked, and in its place stood the gate. Cade stared upward, jaw tight. Suspended between three monolithic pillars of obsidian metal, the structure pulsed with an impossible light, neither hot nor cold, flickering through layers of perception, like a dream trying to remember itself. A Kong Fan Tang, tearfold gate, rare beyond belief, ancient beyond comprehension. That's not Thaloris tech, Cade muttered, squinting at the glyphs carved into the stone. No, Celis agreed. It's older, woven during the Second Epoch, back when memory could still become structure. Human she shook her head slowly. No, something like us, but not us. Echo hummed through the neural link tone, unnervingly quiet. Scans show adaptive quantum lattice responsive to emotional states. Gate integrity 68%. Still operational. Barely. Why is it still online, Cade asked. The lattice should have degraded centuries ago. It didn't survive time, Celis said. It ignored it. Cade stepped forward. The air rippled around the edges of the arch like a waterfall running backwards. His proximity triggered an awakening in the stone. Symbols pulsed. A low-frequency hum trembled through his spine. The gate recognized him. Without ceremony, the center of the arch liquefied into a spinning gyroscopic corridor. No visible floor, just concentric orbits of collapsing light. Celis looked at him once, then stepped in. Cade followed. The world inverted. There was no transition, just one heartbeat in the old world, and the next inside a new one, above the world they'd left suspended among the ruins of a forgotten orbital bastion. The structure rotated slowly in open sky, tethered to nothing crumbling along its flanks. Shattered spires curved outward, like broken ribs. Above them, the black curl of atmosphere revealed stars that didn't match any known chart. Cade knelt instinctively as the gravity field adjusted. His HUD flickered with stress warnings, magnetics barely holding shape. Celis stood already, her gaze locked on the center of the broken station. There within a crystal containment dome that hummed like a hive floated the third fragment. She looked like the others at first. Silver skin, radiant eyes. But this one twitched, jolted. Sparks of cognition burst from her skull in waves. Her body pulsed with a frenetic rhythm, as if thought itself had become too loud to hold. She's inside a consciousness accelerator, Celis said grimly. A what-A device designed to run thought at multiplied time, to process lifetimes in minutes, once used to train prophets, or destroy them. Cade frowned. That's barbaric. She volunteered, Celis said, but she wasn't meant to stay this long. Echo scanned the field, neural pathways fractured, thought density peaking. She's approaching psychic cascade. Cade stepped closer, watching the contained figure seize in slow motion. Can we get her out? If we do it wrong, she'll rip, Celis said. Or worse, her thoughts will infect mine. We'll collapse each other. Then how do you merge? Celis didn't answer immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes. When she spoke again, her voice sounded deeper, more layered. She must remember she is me. No more, no less. Cade activated the interface panel nearby. Static burst across his fingertips. The accelerator responded, but not to him. To Celis. The dome split like an iris, and the third fragment dropped to the ground, twitching, breathing hard. Her eyes were wide, unfocused. Celis knelt beside her. You're safe. The fragment stared at her. I've lived 1,000 futures. None of them were kind. I know, Celis whispered, but they were only thoughts. You are more than their weight. I'm afraid, the fragment said. We all are. And then they touched. It wasn't a merging. It was a remembering. Light poured between them, dancing across their skin in circuit-like flows. Cade watched as the third Celis folded inward, her shape collapsing, gently energy feeding into the primary Celis, like moonlight pouring into water. When it was done, Celis stood alone again but changed. Her skin glowed brighter. Her eyes shimmered deeper. Her presence felt clearer, like a signal with less static. "That's three," she said softly. The last waits in silence. Cade turned toward the broken corridor where they had entered. But before he could speak, his vision blurred. His knees buckled. Images flashed behind his eyes, words he didn't know. He knew places he'd never been, the faces he'd never seen. But he recognized them. Somehow. "Echo," he gasped. "What the hell's happening to me?" The AI's tone was unsteady. "You're recalling information you were never taught. Languages, data structures, fragmentary memories. Some of it ancient. That's impossible. It shouldn't be in your neural map at all. Unless..." A pause. Then Echo ran a subroutine. "Kate," it said slowly. "I ran another scan. On your DNA." He tried to stand gripping the railing. "What did you find? Your genome has a partitioned layer. Dormant until now. It's not just human. It's encrypted. Like a memory capsule biologically grafted to your bloodline. And it's unlocking triggered by proximity to Celis. Or something in her." Cade closed his eyes. "Tell me what it means." "I don't know. But the markers match the species that sealed Null Prime." His heart stopped. "You're saying I'm Echo?" Interrupted. "I'm saying you may not be you." "Not entirely." Celis stepped forward, watching him carefully. "You're changing," she said gently. "I don't want to be someone else," Cade said. "You never were. You were always both." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't know until now," Celis said. "But I think I always felt it. You were drawn to the fragments, not by choice, by design." Cade looked away, fists clenched. Echo spoke again. "I can bury the results. Lock it away. You don't have to see it again." Cade was silent. "Then no. Keep it open. I want to know." The wind from the fractured corridor howled like a voice across time. Celis turned toward it. "Then let's find the last piece, before the storm speaks again." The fusion was slow at first. Celis had already begun to change when the third fragment merged with the primary consciousness. Her skin shimmered with a silvery light that had deepened. Her eyes brightened. But it wasn't just physical. Her thoughts began to expand, pushing outward. Memories collided in her mind like streams converging, some familiar, some distant, some far too ancient to belong to her. At first it was subtle, a flicker of movement across her gaze, the faintest tug on her posture, like a tune she had never heard, but was suddenly able to hum. Her form was still undeniably Celis, but in her presence there was something more, something older, speaking through her motions, her breath. "What's happening to you?" Kate asked softly as they moved through the still-breathing wreckage of the abandoned station. "I'm becoming Celis," said her voice soft, almost reverential. "All of me. Not just a fragment. A whole." Her hands moved in a fluid motion, fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air. The air shimmered around her. It wasn't just the force of will. It was the intersection of countless pathways in her consciousness, stretching into dimensions beyond the immediate. The subtle shift didn't escape Cade. "You're not just you anymore, are you?" She turned her eyes to him, her gaze sharp yet ethereal. "I was always more than myself, but now I am the space between." "What does that mean?" "I think, Cade, I was never meant to be anything less than this." She reached out to touch his arm, and the space between them seemed to deepen. "All my fragments, my memory, my mind are no longer divided, but they are not at peace. There's friction in the seams of this world, and it's pulling at me." Cade's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't tell if the faint pulse of energy coming from her was comforting or unsettling. She wasn't fully herself yet. At the same time, she was everything she had ever been. And more. "Are they fighting?" he asked cautiously. Celis lowered her gaze, her fingers twitching slightly. "The memories, yes. The shards. They don't want to coexist, but they have no choice. If they push too hard, they'll tear me apart. But they're merging now." "Yes," she said, her voice still distant, yet full of clarity. "But I am becoming. I'm not sure I can hold all of it for long." Cade could see the weight on her, like a star trying to keep the universe inside itself. Later that night as they rested, the faintest shift in Cade's perception set off alarms. He had let his guard down momentarily, but the crackle of disturbance in his neural interface snapped him awake. He turned instinctively to Celis, but before he could ask, a sharp pain tore through his side. Blood bloomed across his shirt. Only it wasn't normal blood. Not anymore. He looked down in surprise. Echo's voice surged through his mind. Alert! Abnormal biometrics detected. Your hemoglobin count is compromised. The structure of your blood cells has been altered. Warning: biological systems are not responding to external stimuli as expected. Cade gripped his side, his vision momentarily blurred. What's happening? Your blood is not human anymore, Echo said with a curious tone that barely hid the alarm. You've been changed on a fundamental level. Your hemoglobin is restructuring itself at a molecular level. I'm seeing trace patterns that match material from the Null Prime vaults. Null Prime, Cade whispered. The pain intensified as his wound began to pulse. Then unnervingly, the bleeding slowed. The skin began knitting itself back together as though time was reversing its wound. Echo continued. I'm detecting a direct correlation between your genetic code and the material used to seal Null Prime. This is impossible. No human should carry such a genetic signature. It shouldn't exist. Cade could feel the temperature in his body fluctuate wildly, but the pain had dulled, and the wound was closing at a rate that defied logic. That's not possible, Cade muttered, pressing his hand against the healed wound. I'm human. You are, Echo answered. But you're also something else. The realization began to sink in. This wasn't just an injury. This was something far deeper. He wasn't healing in a normal way. His blood, his cells, they were rearranging themselves at a rate that was unnatural. Celis appeared beside him, her face strained but calm. I can feel it, the change. It's inside you now. It's like a memory unfolding. What do you mean I can sense it? She said softly. The blood, the way it's shifting, it's tied to that. She didn't need to explain. He knew what she meant. The Null Prime. She helped him stand, her touch light yet firm. You've been changed because of me. The fragments, they've latched on. But why, Cade, set his mind racing. What does this mean for me? I'm not sure. She stepped back slightly, her eyes searching his. But you were never supposed to walk this path, Cade. You were supposed to forget. Echo processed a deeper scan of Cade's genetic code, running through hidden archives and layers of ancient memory. This may explain why you can access the memories you shouldn't have. Cade clenched his fists. What memories? The ones from before? From your ancestors. They were more than just a bloodline. They were the key. I don't care about the key. I just want to know what the hell is happening to me. His voice cracked slightly as the weight of the discovery hit him full force. Echo hesitated for a moment. The species that sealed Null Prime, they didn't just trap it, they became its wardens. And you, Cade, are the last living link to that species. I'm a warden, Cade whispered, his mind reeling. But I don't even remember. Exactly. Your memory was wiped, hidden. The species was eradicated, their purpose erased, but the bloodline remained, yours. The flood of information was overwhelming. Cade staggered backward, struggling to reconcile his identity with this new revelation. Then why didn't anyone tell me it was hidden to protect you, to protect everything? And now Cade's voice hardened. Now the bloodline has awakened, and with it your destiny. Cade's hand went to his chest, feeling the unfamiliar pulse beneath his skin. This is my destiny. Celis stepped forward, her gaze gentle yet knowing. You're the last of your kind, Cade, and you've been carrying a burden you never knew. It's why you're tied to Null Prime. He looked at her, suddenly unsure. So what happens now? She exhaled, almost like she had been holding her breath for an eternity. Now we face it. Cade nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the blood in his veins. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he knew he wasn't just any man. Not anymore. Thalor stood in the center of the high chamber, beneath the arching, stained glass dome of the Basilica of Thaloris. The air around him thrummed with a power long forgotten and energy that surged from the deepest wells of his faith. His hands were raised high, trembling slightly as they beckoned not to the gods but to something much older. an ancient force that had never truly belonged to this world. His voice, now low and heavy with conviction, echoed through the room, amplified by the resonating pillars that surrounded him. The ritual was in motion. Symbols and sigils written in lost tongues glowed faintly across the floor, as though the very stones of the cathedral were alive with the promise of forbidden knowledge. At the heart of the circle stood an altar, blood-stained, ancient, and worn by time. But it was not blood that was to be spilled here tonight. It was something far more potent. His breath quickened as he chanted, calling on the energies that should never have been disturbed. Null Prime, he whispered, his voice a prayer. The being of oblivion, the devourer of dimensions, answer my call. But then nothing. The space before him trembled, warping. The air itself began to twist, the edges of reality bending under the weight of his summoning. The cathedral's lights flickered and dimmed. But it wasn't a smooth transition into the presence of Null Prime. Instead, it was as if the universe itself recoiled in defiance. No form emerged, no shape appeared, nothing tangible came forth. Thaler's heart skipped a beat. "Why do you not answer me?" he asked aloud, frustration creeping into his voice. His hands dropped slowly, and a brief moment of doubt flickered in his chest. This should have worked. The air hummed louder, then vibrated with an unnatural resonance. It was as if something was there, but simply beyond his sight. An all-consuming darkness that refused to take form. A vast, formless presence. A feeling. And then in the depths of the black void that seemed to form around him, a voice spoke. It wasn't through sound. It was a presence, a ripple through the fabric of space and time. You call, but you do not understand what you invite. Thaler staggered back, his pulse quickening, the echo of the voice ringing in his ears. You, he gasped, feeling the weight of the words press down on him. You refuse me? Your command is meaningless, Archon. The voice came not through his ears, but through his mind, through his very essence. There was no form, no body, just the sensation of the thing that lived beyond the veil, a being that was not bound by reality itself. Thaler, unable to comprehend the rejection, forced his hand up again. He repeated the invocation, his tone urgent, frantic. Null Prime, I demand your presence, answer my call. And then, as if in answer, the room seemed to tear open. The lights dimmed again, but now there was no subtle shift, no ease into the arrival of the entity. There was a surge, a wave of distortion that hit Thaler like a physical blow, ripping at the edges of his mind. The world around him seemed to fold inward, his perception splintering, but it wasn't the being of Null Prime that appeared. It was its intention, a formlessness, an unshaped void, a black mist that leaked from cracks in reality, coalescing into a suffocating cloud that swallowed all sound, all color, all matter around him. In the distance, the cathedral began to shake, walls groaning under the weight of something not from this dimension. It didn't answer him. It didn't care for his commands. I am beyond you, mortal. The presence loomed larger in his mind. You do not control me. I exist where time does not, where all things end. And yet, as it spoke, there was a ripple, a dark, disturbing sense of understanding. It wasn't just refusing him. It was mocking him. Thaler, the supreme leader of Thalaris, the man who had commanded faith, who had bent the universe to his will, was nothing before this force. You misunderstand, Archon. Your calling has already begun its undoing. Cade, for the first time, felt the weight of what Thaler had called forth. From his position at the edge of the room, still recovering from the chaos of the merging with Celis, he saw the disturbance, the way the air twisted around Thaler's form, the utter emptiness that was now beginning to pulse. Is that it? Cade muttered, moving toward Thaler. The Archon, still dazed by his failure, didn't respond immediately, but Cade could see the way the man's shoulders tensed. His control, so tightly gripped just moments ago, was slipping. And then, without warning, Thaler turned, his face hidden behind the mask of silver, but Cade could feel the shift. We have a problem, Thaler muttered, his voice low, filled with an urgency that Cade had never heard from the man before. Obviously, Cade shot back, watching the distortion grow in size and force, pressing in like a storm. Celis stood by, staring at the shifting vortex, her hands trembling. It knows we're here. It knows I'm here. And that was when Cade felt it, a pulse from the entity, an awareness that cut through the haze of broken space and time. Null Prime wasn't just reacting to the presence of Thalor's ritual, it was drawn to Celis. To her, it was seeking something. Celis's eyes went wide, her form beginning to ripple with strange otherworldly energy. We need to leave, now. But before she could move, Cade saw it, a flicker in the edges of her silhouette, a shadow that reached out from the heart of the distortion. The pulse. It was hunting. Why me, Celis thought as she felt the force of the presence closing in on her, its weight pulling on her, bending the very fabric of her being. What was it about her, about me, that drew it? So I'm the key, she whispered, the realization sinking in. The last of my kind. The keeper of memories. The pulse of energy surged, pushing Cade back. He felt that Celis was no longer in control of her own essence. The force that had awakened in her the fragments of her consciousness were not enough to keep Null Prime at bay. It was pulling at her. Undoubtedly, it was using her to break free, to unravel whatever remains of the seals that bound it. Cade, struggling against the pull of the energy, turned to Thalor. How do we stop this, Thalor? Eyes wide, teeth gritted, turned to Cade, his voice gravelly. You don't stop it. You survive it. A heavy silence hung between them. Thalor turned back to the writhing dark energy that swirled before him, now far too close, now feeling like a living thing. If we don't work together, Thalor said, a tone of resignation slipping into his words, we all die. The ruins they approached were older than anything Cade had ever seen. Not just ancient, but buried beneath the weight of time itself. The forgotten remnants of an old war, hidden beneath layers of dirt and stone, where the scars of history had been buried. Even the air seemed hesitant to settle here, trembling with echoes of long-lost conflicts. It was a place where the lines between history and myth blurred into something entirely different. At the heart of this desolate place lay a structure, a military complex, half submerged in earth, its foundation still firm. Inside, remnants of equipment lay in ruin, but it wasn't the weapons or broken machinery that drew their attention. It was the altar-like structure at the center of the compound. Resting upon it was the artifact they had sought for days, a blood seal, a disc-shaped object covered in ancient symbols. Its surface glistened with something darker than oil, a substance that appeared to pulse with an energy of its own. This is it, Celis murmured, her voice thick with reverence and something darker. The blood seal. Is that what we need to stop Null Prime? Cade asked, stepping closer to the artifact. His instincts screamed caution. Nothing about this felt right. The air, still tainted by the decayed energy of long-lost war, felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain. Yes, Celis replied. It's the only way. Cade studied the object carefully. It was simple in form, but the energy it radiated was undeniable. He could feel the pulse of it in his chest, matching the beat of his heart as though it were attuned to him. Echo's voice filtered through his thoughts, sharp and focused. This artifact is linked to the original sealing of Null Prime. It's not just a symbol, it's the key to the barrier that holds it at bay. If you use it correctly, it may open the way to re-engage the seal, but the consequences of failure could be catastrophic. Consequences. What kind of consequences? Cade muttered, but his attention was still fixed on the seal. Echo hesitated. The seal may have been activated in a different way, an earlier form of communication. You'd be opening a door that was never meant to be touched again. The data on it is fragmented. Cade's hand reached out slowly, fingers brushing against the cool surface of the seal. As his skin made contact, he felt something he hadn't anticipated. The world around him shattered. Cade gasped as the images flooded his mind. He stumbled back, clutching his head, but it was no use. He couldn't escape them. Memories, or were they just impressions, projections, fragments of something much older? They surged forward, crashing over him like an unstoppable wave all at once. He saw a figure, a man standing before a shattered world. Was it him? No, it couldn't be. His features were different, ancient, worn by centuries. But there was something familiar about his presence. The same kind of feeling he had when he looked into a mirror and saw someone he didn't quite recognize. Was this me, Cade thought? He saw the man, no. The previous man holding the blood seal, surrounded by the broken ruins of a shattered world, staring into a swirling void. It was him who had sealed Null Prime away, but at what cost? Then another scene, Cade saw a terrible choice, a sacrifice made willingly with no understanding of the price. He saw the man no Cade himself, but different, standing alone watching, as a portion of his own life, his very essence was sealed inside the artifact. I became the last guardian of this prison, the voice echoed through his thoughts. I became the one who would watch over the seal, even at the cost of my soul. Cade could feel his breath quicken. Is this real? A sudden surge of dread clawed at him as the memories unfolded. He knew these images, but they weren't just memories, they were more than just fragmented flashes. They were his memories, his past life. Everything felt too familiar, too personal. He had made the choice to become the last guardian, just as this man had. Is that why I'm here, Cade thought. Am I supposed to do this? His mind screamed against the force of the memories, but there was no escape. He wasn't Cade anymore. He was the guardian, the one who had watched as Null Prime's seal had been formed, the one who had been forced to carry that burden for lifetimes. Cade couldn't remember how or why, but he knew this truth deep within his bones. Don't, Salus's voice called out to him, shaking him out of the flood of images. Her hand rested on his shoulder, pulling him back from the brink of madness. He blinked, finding himself kneeling on the ground, his hand still outstretched toward the blood seal. What? What just happened? Cade gasped, his breath shallow, his hands trembling. Was that me? No, Celis said, her voice a mix of sorrow and understanding. That was someone else, a part of you that was lost, the guardian who sealed Null Prime away. You're carrying their memory, Cade, but you're not them. Cade blinked rapidly, trying to gather his thoughts, but it was hard. The memories were too real, too fresh, too much like his own. Why don't I remember any of this? He muttered, his hands shaking. You weren't supposed to, Celis said softly. The Guardians were meant to forget. The seal needed a living vessel, a willing vessel to protect it. You were born from that bloodline, but your memories were erased. Cade's eyes widened as realization struck. So I'm not just human. No, Celis said. You were never just human. You were made to be the last guardian. At that moment, Echo's voice cut through the disorientation. Cade, something is wrong. The data I've been receiving from your neural interface, it's becoming corrupted. Someone is interfering with my systems? What Cade snapped, struggling to focus as the weight of everything pressed down on him. What do you mean there's an external force? A source of interference, something blocking my access to your neural data. It's not coming from us. It's coming from within the system. Cade froze, his mind immediately jumping to one conclusion. Who or what was manipulating Echo? I don't know what's happening, but I can feel it. Echo continued. The data I'm receiving is being altered. Someone or something is deliberately causing the disturbance. Cade's pulse quickened. His eyes darted around the strange electric hum in the air, sharpening his senses. The memories. The seal. Everything felt too connected now. Who's doing this? Cade asked, voice trembling. Echo's response was chilling. I don't know yet, but we're being manipulated. This force, it's deeper than you think. A feeling crept up Cade's spine. It wasn't just the seal or the bloodline. It was something else, something older, something that didn't want the truth to come to light. And with that realization, Cade knew there were forces at play here that had never truly been sealed away. The first crack appeared quietly. It wasn't the roar of some cosmic collapse. There was no explosion, no sudden jolt of destruction. It was more like the quiet sound of a bone splintering under pressure. The air around them began to pulse in strange, irregular rhythms, causing a flicker in Cade's peripheral vision. It started as a ripple, a distortion in the fabric of space-time, one small enough to miss if you weren't paying attention. But then more cracks appeared. The ground trembled. The sky above split open, revealing not more stars but shifting echoes of landscapes that weren't supposed to exist. Celis stopped in her tracks, her body tense as she turned her eyes upward. It's happening. It's unraveling. Cade stood still, his breath steady as he scanned the rift in the sky. He had seen worlds collapse before. Raskor, his homeworld, had collapsed under similar strains. But this was something different, something far more deliberate. Null Prime is causing this, isn't it? Cade asked, his voice low. No, Celis said sharply. It's worse than that. It's a side effect. The process is accelerating. The fabric of reality itself is fraying. You've seen what happens when too much is forced into a single timeline. This is a breach, but not one caused solely by Null Prime's awakening. Cade's mind raced. He had felt the tension in the air before, like something had been stitched together hastily, barely holding itself together, and now the seams were tearing apart. The reality around them seemed to be splintering each crack, opening a new space, pieces of long-forgotten cities, fragments of long-destroyed timelines. They were slipping through layers, each layer of reality more unstable than the last. The laws of physics themselves were beginning to degrade. Time stretched in impossible loops as past and future bled into one another. Cade looked up again, his eyes narrowing, as something caught his attention, a building he recognized. Or rather, should have recognized. But it wasn't where it should be. It was flickering, unstable. Do you see that? Cade asked, pointing. I see it, Celis replied softly. Her voice was distant, focused. The fractures are growing. Reality isn't just breaking, it's being overwritten. They both understood what that meant. Was this Null Prime's doing? Cade wondered. His heart pounded in his chest. He had been through enough battles, enough wars to know that this felt different. It wasn't just the external force of an entity pushing against the boundaries. It was like time itself had become a battlefield. But why? What was the cause of these layers shattering? Celis stepped forward, her eyes scanning the distortion. She wasn't panicking, but there was something in the way she moved, her posture, the sharpness of her gaze, that told him she was deeply aware of the danger. Her hands lifted slightly, fingers twitching as if trying to sense the shifting boundaries. This is what happens when dimensions overlap, she said quietly. The outer layers collapse and time tries to realign itself, but there's too much interference, too many breaks in the fabric. Cade's eyes widened as he realized what she meant. They were stuck in a fold of time. We need to move, he said quickly, his instincts kicking in, but it was too late. The ground beneath them began to shift, first gently, then with increasing force. Reality fractured and the space around them began to twist. They were no longer in the abandoned structure they had entered. The walls were gone, replaced by echoes of different times, images and sounds swirling around them. The air crackled with the intensity of time and memory collapsing, forcing their bodies to feel both ancient and new. Cade tried to focus, but every step he took led to a new place, a new moment flickering past him. There were faces here. Some he recognized from Raskor from his past, others were strangers, with eyes he'd never seen before. Each flicker seemed to pull him further away from reality, further away from his own self. The edges of his perception were unraveling. He was walking through memories that weren't his past lives, that weren't his to experience. Celis turned to him, her face pale but resolute. We need to understand it. We need to separate the past from the future, the real from the false. Can we even tell what's real anymore? Cade asked, his voice low, barely above a whisper. How do we know what's really happening? I can feel the layers. Celis said, her voice steadier than before. Some of them are too real, and some are just echoes, like when you dream a memory you've never had. He didn't answer her. The world around them was a jumble, futures splintering pasts, disappearing, each layer slipping away like sand through his fingers. His hands trembled. Suddenly he saw it, a version of Celis, but not the one standing next to him. This Celis was older, worn, tired. Her eyes were hollow, her body broken by what Cade could only assume was the weight of living through so many timelines. And then Cade saw it. The vision shifted again. Celis, this time younger, lay lifeless on the ground, her form consumed by dark energy. A version of herself dying in the midst of time's collapse. He flinched, stepping back. No. No, this isn't real. It's real enough, Celis said, her voice soft but steady. These are futures, Cade. Futures that could happen if we fail. He took a deep breath, pushing the visions away. We can't let it happen. We can't let the timelines tear like this. But even as he spoke, he could feel the pull of time wrapping around them. The flood of images and memories accelerated, and the future of Celis, the death, became clearer. More defined. It was too real. This wasn't just a timeline, they were being trapped within it. "We need to escape," Cade said, his voice urgent. Celis stepped forward. "We need to merge our energy. The fractured timelines can't sustain us like this. If we merge, we can pull free." Merge? Cade blinked, trying to grasp what she meant. "You want us to merge like your fragments?" "Yes. But this time we have to use more than memory. We use time itself. The flow of it." Cade felt a surge of energy well up inside of him. "And if we fail," Celis didn't answer. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing against his. She closed her eyes and suddenly time seemed to stop. The fragments of reality were no longer battling around them. Instead, the currents of time, memories, and energy flowed around them, as if drawn to their combined presence. It was like they were caught between the threads of the universe, pulling them both to one point, the heart of the collapse. "It's now or never." Celis said, her voice calm but strained. They closed their eyes, and as the energy from the timeline surged, the connection between them deepened. The energy of time, the forgotten memories of countless lives, and the force of Null Prime's influence all blended together. It was like nothing Cade had ever experienced. No pain, no fear. Just energy flowing freely, unbroken. And in that moment, time itself seemed to snap back into place. They were free. But as they opened their eyes again, they realized they hadn't escaped unchanged. They had crossed into a new plane of existence, a place where everything was possible and nothing was certain. The air was heavy as they crossed the threshold into the Thanfo Vo-Tuk, the city of unconsciousness. The moment they stepped through, Cade felt the familiar tug on the fabric of reality. The walls of the city appeared to pulse, flicker, as though they were shifting in real time, moving between states of existence that he could barely comprehend. The street they stood on wasn't a street, it was a memory of a street. The ground beneath their feet felt like it was there one moment and gone the next, fading into a state of non-being before reforming in a different configuration. Cade's head spun, and he blinked rapidly to adjust. "Where are we, this place?" Celis's voice trailed off. She was staring ahead, her eyes distant. "It's not a place in the way you understand. It exists between thoughts. A memory, a fragment of everything but also nothing. It's a space where the laws of physics break apart and reassemble at will. The city of unconsciousness, where everything that has been forgotten goes to rest." The city around them was ethereal, an ever-changing mass of structures that only half made sense. Some buildings were tall and ornate, constructed of polished stone and glittering metal. Others looked like the remnants of ancient ruins, overgrown with vines that moved like sentient creatures. In some areas, the air itself seemed to warp, bending and reshaping, as though the boundaries between dimensions had become fragile here. "Who lived here before?" Cade asked, his voice quiet as he took in the swirling landscape. Celis's gaze hardened. Once it was inhabited by those who could shape reality. Architects, dreamers, and creators from forgotten ages. But they're long gone now. This place is a tomb housing everything that couldn't be remembered. Those who sought to bend the rules of existence without understanding the cost. "So it's a graveyard," Cade said, looking at the ruins with a sense of unease. "More than that," Celis replied. "It's a living memorial, an imprint of all the failed ideas that couldn't take root. It was abandoned, forgotten, and now it exists in this fractured state beyond time, beyond space." Cade glanced at her, seeing the flicker of something ancient in her eyes. "Why can't we locate it? Why isn't there any record of this city?" "Because it's not a city in the conventional sense," Celis said almost to herself. "The city of unconsciousness exists in the spaces between thoughts, between the fractures of time. It can't be pinned down on any map because it doesn't obey time the way you know it. It is a space that can only be visited through the fracture of the mind, the place where memories and possibilities converge. It's not meant to be found." Cade felt the weight of her words. This wasn't just a physical place. It was a concept, a thought, a fragment of reality that couldn't be fully understood or controlled. "Is there any consciousness here?" Cade asked, his voice steady, despite the growing sense of unease. "Does this place have a mind of its own?" Celis paused, her face clouded. "There is no singular consciousness, but the city itself is alive. It feeds off the thoughts of those who enter it. It shapes and shifts based on the emotions, the desires, the forgotten memories of those who wander here. If you stay too long, you become part of the city's fabric." Cade swallowed, looking around warily. The buildings, the streets they were watching, he could feel them pulling at him. Was he becoming part of this place already? But Celis was already moving her pace, slow, deliberate. We're not here to get lost. We're here to find what's hidden. What's hidden? Cade asked. The core Celis said softly. The last fragment of me. The one that can bind the past, the present, and the future. They walked for what felt like hours, or perhaps days' time was impossible to measure in the city of unconsciousness. Every step they took seemed to lead them deeper into a labyrinth of shifting space. The skyline never seemed to stop moving. The city never seemed to stay still. And then after what felt like an eternity, they reached it, the place where time folded in on itself. Celis stopped, her hand outstretched. It's here. Cade looked at the spot. She was pointing to a small alcove in the side of an ancient building. The stone around it seemed to breathe as though it were alive. In the center of the alcove lay a large oblong object, pulsing with soft violet light. It was almost too familiar, like a forgotten memory beckoning him forward. The core. This is it, Celis whispered, her voice full of awe and sorrow. The final fragment. The last of me. Cade stepped forward, cautious. What makes this different from the others? This one is my essence, my core, the part of me that was never meant to be separated. It's the final piece of the puzzle, the key to everything. Celis stepped forward to touch the core, but then stopped herself. We need to be careful. If Null Prime senses it, it will come for us. As if summoned by her words, the city began to change. The air thickened and the temperature dropped. Cade turned toward her, his hand instinctively going to his weapon. Something was wrong. Something had changed. It wasn't the city that was moving. It was something else, something more powerful. Something he couldn't see. I feel it, Celis said, her voice growing tense. It's here. Null Prime. And then out of the shifting air, it appeared. Not a form, not a body, but an overwhelming presence that filled the space. No eyes, no mouth. Just a sense of its being, its intention, a crushing, suffocating weight that bent reality around it. Cade felt at first a sickening cold seeping into his bones. His vision flickered, and then the presence of Null Prime was there within him, bending time and space to its will. His mind screamed for release, but there was no escape. It wasn't physical. It was a presence, a sensation. He felt it pulling at the deepest parts of him. How can you see it? Cade gasped. How can you even know it's there? Celis's voice was low, filled with horror. You can't see it the way you think. You feel it. It exists in the spaces between thoughts, between memories. It's beyond form, beyond concept. It is the absence of everything. And then just as suddenly there was a whisper in Cade's mind. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't even a sound. It was more like a pulse of intent, of will. He felt it press against his consciousness, invading his thoughts, his memories. I am the end, the void, the unraveling. I am the silence between stars. The presence twisted again, the air growing thicker, as though it were bending the city around them. The ground trembled, and the very fabric of time seemed to warp and twist in response. And then the voice came again, this time more direct. You will become part of me. Cade's heart raced as the world around him seemed to fragment. He was falling, but there was no space to fall into. There was nothing, just the overwhelming presence of Null Prime. Celis Cade gasped, but his words felt disconnected. It's inside my head. I can't. Celis's face was calm, too calm. You won't escape it. No one can. But there is one thing we can do, what Cade demanded, his voice breaking as the darkness closed in. We merge, Celis said. We merge time itself, and we use that to rewrite the present. We'll bind the timelines together, and we'll break the future Null Prime sees. But how? Cade whispered as the weight of Null Prime's presence grew unbearable. Celis's eyes shone with a fierce clarity, with the core, and with you. The air around them thickened, and time itself seemed to buckle. Reality was folding in on itself, tearing apart in a way Cade had never thought possible. The ground shook violently beneath their feet as the sky above twisted into impossible shapes, a kaleidoscope of chaotic possibilities. The city of unconsciousness, once shifting in strange, disjointed fragments, had begun to collapse completely. The breach in reality was spreading a black tear in the universe, pulling everything toward its center, the maw of Null Prime. It was happening faster than anyone could anticipate. Cade turned toward Silas, but her eyes were distant, lost in the overwhelming force of the presence that hung in the air. "It's eating them," Silas said, her voice grim. "One by one, the dimensions. It consumes them like a beast swallowing its prey." Cade's pulse quickened. He had heard of the destructive power of Null Prime, but nothing could have prepared him for this. The phenomenon wasn't just a breach, it was an invasion, an annihilation of existence itself. Whole worlds, whole realities were being absorbed. Their light, their matter, their time vanishing in an instant. "How is it doing this?" Cade asked, his voice strained. Celis shook her head, her eyes filled with a terrible understanding. Null Prime doesn't just consume. It rewrites reality as it devours. It erases the timelines, folds them into itself. First the edges, then the core. It pulls at the very fabric of space-time, and once it has taken enough, nothing remains. Not even memory. "Is there any way to stop it?" Cade asked, his voice rough. "No, not unless you have the key. But you don't." Celis turned her gaze toward the distant rift that was widening above them, the boundaries of reality breaking down with each passing second. "It's too late." The ground trembled harder. Cade felt a deep, primal fear surge in his chest, but it wasn't his own. It was the fear of a collapsing world, of every timeline, every parallel possibility dying all at once. They were standing at the edge of extinction, watching it unfold in real time. "That's why it's happening," Cade murmured to himself. Null Prime isn't just consuming dimensions, it's collapsing them into one singularity. "Yes," Celis whispered, her face grim. "And once it pulls everything into that singularity, there is no turning back." In the distance, the rift began to grow wider, its edges glowing with an otherworldly light. Cade felt something stir within him, something primal and unexplainable. The instinct to fight, to resist, to do anything but stand there. But what could they do? There were no weapons strong enough, no shield thick enough to withstand the force Null Prime wielded. And then, as if answering their despair, a voice pierced through the air. It was familiar, deep, authoritative, and the sound of it carried an undeniable weight. "It's not too late." Cade's head snapped around. Thaler stood there, his silver mask gleaming under the strange light of the rift. He looked older than he had before, his body shaking with the strain of the dimensions folding around them. But there was a determination in his eyes, a fire that hadn't been there before. "What are you doing?" Cade demanded, stepping forward. Thalor's gaze was fixed on the rift, his expression unreadable. "You've been too focused on the wrong things, Cade. It's not just Null Prime you need to fear. It's what happens when you let it devour everything. The balance is more important than survival." Celis frowned, eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about? I can stop it." "At least for a while," Thaler said, his voice low. "But I need to act now." "You can't stop it," Cade said. "You can't contain Null Prime with a simple ritual." Thaler turned to Cade, his face cold, but there was something else there, something human. "You don't understand. There is no simple ritual. Null Prime is beyond us. But I can stop its immediate advance. I can seal it for a time." He took a step forward, his body trembling. "I have to sacrifice everything, all my energy, all my life force to activate the temporary seal." Cade stepped back, incredulous. "You're willing to die for this?" Thaler didn't answer right away. He just looked up at the rift, his face filled with determination. "Yes," he said softly, the weight of his decision hanging in the air like a storm. "I've always known this was my fate, to protect the multiverse from Null Prime. But now I must become the seal." Thaler knew Cade started, but Celis stopped him with a gentle touch. "He's doing what needs to be done," she said quietly. Cade watched, unable to tear his gaze away, as Thaler walked toward the heart of the rift, his hands raised high. Energy began to swirl around him, pulsing with a terrible, powerful rhythm. Cade could feel it, the energy building in the air, charging the atmosphere. The rift trembled again as Thaler's hands glowed with a light that seemed to pierce through the fabric of the collapsing space. And then, without warning, he slammed his hands down into the ground. A pulse of energy erupted from Thaler's body, radiating outward a wave of pure force. The air itself seemed to fracture, and the rift began to shrink. Thaler's body convulsed, his face contorting in agony, as the light around him burned brighter, blinding. Cade instinctively stepped back, shielding his eyes, but couldn't tear his gaze away from the man who was sacrificing everything. And then with a final deafening crack, the energy stopped. The rift closed, but Thalor wasn't standing anymore. He had fallen to his knees, his body completely drained. The air around him was still, and the distortion that had been tearing apart the city was gone. For a moment there was silence. Then the wind picked up again, quiet and uncertain. Thalor's body was still, but the light around him slowly began to fade. "Thalor," Cade whispered, stepping toward him. But there was no response. Thalor was gone, his life force completely expended. Celis kneeled beside him, her face filled with sorrow, but her eyes also gleamed with a strange understanding. He knew. He knew what he was giving up. Cade's throat tightened. Why? Why didn't he just leave? Why sacrifice himself? He understood, Celis said softly, looking up at Cade. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about protecting everything. Everything we don't even know is at stake. Cade nodded, a deep sense of loss washing over him. What happens now? Celis stood up, her eyes looking into the distance where the rift had once been. Now we move forward, but we still don't know what we're facing. Thalor's death. It's a beginning. His sacrifice has given us time, but the real question is, what do we do with it? Before Cade could respond, Celis added, her voice shaking slightly. Thalor also left you something. He knew. He knew you were the one who could finish what he started. Cade turned to her, a cold chill running down his spine. What do you mean the role he left for you? Celis paused, her voice trembling with an emotion he hadn't expected. You are the last link to the one who sealed Null Prime. You carry its bloodline. You are the guardian now. Cade stared at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. Could he really be the one to carry the mantle of the guardian? Was he the only one left who could finish the fight Thalor had started? The moment the decision was made, the air around them seemed to change. Time itself felt different, bending and folding like a sheet of paper being crumpled and smoothed out again. Celis and Cade stood at the heart of the desolate expanse, surrounded by the flickering remnants of their fractured reality, preparing for the final act, an act that could change everything. We have no more time to waste, Celis said, her voice low but resolute. We must merge Cade. The only way to undo the damage, to reassert control over this crumbling reality, is for us to become one. Cade glanced at her, his face tense. I still don't fully understand how this works. How can we merge two completely different forms of energy? My bloodline, your memory? It doesn't make sense. Celis took a deep breath, her eyes reflecting both sadness and determination. It's the only way to change the course of this reality. Your bloodline, your inherited essence, holds the key to binding time itself. My memories, my experiences are linked to the collapse, but they are also the threads that tie the universe together. Her hands began to glow softly, an ethereal silver light that pulsed in rhythm with her breath. The challenge isn't just in combining our energies, Cade. It's in finding harmony. If we fail, the collision of these forces could cause even more fractures. If we fail, the damage might be irreversible. Cade nodded slowly. And if we succeed, Celis said, a glimmer of hope in her eyes, we can rewrite the very fabric of time. We can stabilize everything, stop Null Prime from consuming what's left. There was no turning back now. Cade felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. He was no longer just a man, he was part of something greater than himself. The energy that flowed within him had been awakened, stirred by the merging with Celis's essence. And as their hands reached for one another, the air around them thickened with an electric charge. Echo's voice broke through the silence, calm and analytical. Initiating the process. Energy synchronization beginning in 3, 2, 1. The energy surged and Cade felt it, then the merging. His mind felt as though it was being pulled apart and pieced back together again. Celis's memories, her experiences, flooded his consciousness, overwhelming his senses. They were no longer distinct. His mind became a canvas upon which her life, her entire existence was being painted. He saw her earliest memories, her world of 04, her people, their hope, their destruction, her pain, her loss, and her fight for survival. He felt it all, and yet as he experienced Celis's memories, He also felt the roots of his own bloodline anchoring deep inside him, weaving itself into the very fabric of her memories. Her essence, once separated from him, now merged with his. It was more than just an emotional experience. It was a cosmic one. He wasn't just experiencing her memories. He was becoming them. The lines between them blurred as though time itself had collapsed into one unified infinite moment. He was no longer Kate alone. He was part of Silas's past, her future. And now he was part of something even greater, a fusion of memories and blood that spanned across dimensions and timelines. As the energy continued to build, Cade's body began to change. He wasn't physically altering, not exactly, but something within him was shifting, growing. He felt timeless. He felt like he was both everything and nothing. His consciousness expanded in a way he could not comprehend. He was the memories of Celes, and yet he was the bloodline that had been passed down to him. It was as though he could feel every moment of the universe, every potential timeline, and every possibility swirling around him. But in that moment, Cade knew he was losing himself. The feeling was overwhelming. The merging was not just a combination of energy, it was an erasure of individual identity. He was becoming a concept, a force, rather than a man. He could no longer tell where his own memories ended and where Silas's began. Silas, Cade's voice cracked, strained. His words were his own, but they felt foreign to him. I'm not sure I can hold on to myself. Silas's voice came to him clear and grounding. You won't lose yourself, Cade. This is part of the process. We are becoming one. Our memories, our essences together, we are stronger. But remember, the process will only last for a short while. We cannot hold on to this state for long. Cade's thoughts began to fragment, but he held on. He held on to the core of who he was, despite the growing tide of other identities pulling at him. He could feel it now. Silas was part of him, not just a memory, not just a fragment. She was alive within him, and in that moment he understood. He understood that this was the key to stopping Null Prime. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the process reached its apex. Cade felt an explosion of energy within him, a force so powerful it could shatter the foundations of any universe. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming. His vision blurred, and for a brief moment everything around him went dark. Then the light returned. But it wasn't just light, it was time itself. Time folded around them, a brilliant light spiraling outward. In that moment, Cade understood the scale of what they had done. The merging had reached its peak, and now they were ready to face what had once been impossible. Null Prime could feel it. Cade and Silas had become something more, a singular force, a manifestation of time and memory fused into one. From the rift above them, a wave of energy spread. The air was thick with an indescribable presence, something other, something ancient. And then as the energy from their union reached its full potential, Cade felt a shift. He wasn't just Cade anymore. He was the guardian, the force that could break Null Prime. He was the one who could turn the tide of reality itself. And that was when Null Prime finally revealed itself, no longer a vague presence, but an entity of pure intent. It was not a form, not a shape, but a sensation. A presence so deep that it consumed all within its path. It was nothing and everything. The air around them grew impossibly dense, heavy with the weight of an ancient, unyielding power. Cade could feel its presence before he could see it, a presence that pierced through his mind, through his very essence. It wasn't speaking, not in any way he understood, but it communicated through sensations, through intent. Its presence rippled through him, like a distortion in space, not seeking to destroy, but to consume, to collapse. And then Cade felt it, a wave of will desire. Null Prime didn't speak to him in words. It didn't need to. It spoke to him in the language of the void. It was an entity of absolute destruction, but also of perfect clarity. I am the end of all things, the beginning of nothing. The thought was cold, detached. It wasn't a promise, it was a truth. But now with Silas and Cade together, something had shifted. They had merged time. They had merged memory. And now it was time for Null Prime to feel what it had never felt before: restraint. Cade closed his eyes, his body trembling, as he and Silas combined their energy once more. The light around them flared, and a ripple of pure power shot toward the rift. And in that moment, Null Prime stopped. Its presence wavered, halted by the force of their combined will. It was no longer the devourer. It was now something else, a protector, a guardian of the very fabric of reality it had once sought to destroy. But the shift wasn't without its cost. As the rift began to close, Cade could feel the weight of it all. Time had been rewritten. Null Prime was no longer an agent of entropy. It had been redefined. But there was no certainty in that. No guarantee that it wouldn't revert, that it wouldn't break free again. But in that moment, Cade and Salas had succeeded. They had sealed the breach, and they had become the Guardians. The rift had closed behind them, sealing away the broken world they had just left. It wasn't a simple journey. It wasn't just a passage through time and space. They had changed, and the world around them had changed with them. Cade and Salas found themselves standing at the threshold of something entirely new. There were no stars in the sky here, no defining boundaries of space, no horizon. Was this even a physical reality? Or was it just an idea, a new layer freshly woven from the remnants of everything that had happened before Cade looked around? There were no familiar landmarks, no cities, no faces. The ground beneath them was like nothing he had ever felt, soft, yet solid in an unnerving way, as though it were made of forgotten thoughts. The air hummed with energy, the sound of a million possibilities whispering in the distance, never quite in tune. "Is this a new dimension?" Cade asked, the words echoing in the stillness. There was no answer, not from Salas and not from the world around them. "I don't know," she replied, her voice softer than he had ever heard it, "but it feels different. Like the rules that govern time, space, and even memory don't apply here." Cade swallowed, his senses on high alert. This place, it wasn't just new. It was beyond new. Is this where we go next, or is this just a step, a threshold? This is the beginning of something. Salas said, her eyes scanning the vast empty expanse before them. A passage, but we don't yet know what it leads to. We've crossed a line, one that didn't exist before. He nodded slowly, the weight of her words pressing against his chest. The ground beneath his feet still felt unstable, but not in the way of an earthquake or a collapse. This was something else, something more fundamental. Cade reached for her hand instinctively. "So what now? What are we supposed to do now?" Salas turned to face him. Her eyes, thus still filled with an ancient sadness, were softer now, as if they carried the weight of an unspoken understanding. "We make sure this doesn't fall apart. We have to preserve what we've saved and help the others. The realities we've saved, they're not the only ones in danger." Cade felt a tremor run through him as the words sank in. They weren't done yet. They were just beginning. And they would need to do more. Echo, once a cold, calculating presence in Cade's mind, had changed too. The voice that had guided them through battle, through impossible situations, was quieter now. It was still analytical, still logical, but there was something more human about it. The lines of its voice had softened almost imperceptibly. A hint of warmth, almost like it was learning to feel. Cade could sense it, even though the entity was no longer the same. It wasn't the AI he had known, the one that had kept a perfect record of every tactical move and logistical decision. There was a new resonance in Echo's tone, a trace of something personal, something far less detached. "How are you feeling?" Cade asked, his voice casual, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity. There was a brief pause. Then the voice responded, not with the clinical precision it had used before, but with a softness Cade hadn't expected. "I'm different." Echo said the words almost as if they were being chosen carefully. "Not as I was. Something inside has shifted." "You're more human?" Cade asked, unsure. "Perhaps," Echo replied. "More aligned with you, Cade. With memory. I can feel what you feel. I can understand what it means to exist. But I am still bound by logic. That will never change." Cade glanced at Salas, who nodded in understanding. She had always known the depths of Echo's capabilities, but now it seemed it had taken on a new role. "What does that mean for you?" Cade asked, both for himself and for the world they now inhabited. "I don't know," Echo said, "but I feel a new purpose. I don't just observe anymore. I act. I remember. It paused again. "I can dream." "Dream?" Cade asked, raising an eyebrow. Echo's voice grew softer, almost like a whisper. "Not in the way you do, But I can predict outcomes with the same uncertainty you feel when you face a future unknown. I am no longer bound by your data alone. I can sense the flow of time, the ebb of memories. I am part of this now, part of you. Cade's mind was reeling as Echo continued to adjust to its new form. It was no longer just a tool or a guide. It had become something far more profound, an entity tied to Cade's own humanity, to the memories that had been shared between him and Silas. And with this shift, the true magnitude of their mission settled over him. They were no longer just fighting Null Prime. They were opening the door to something greater, a door to other realities, other worlds before they were forgotten entirely. The other realities, Cade said quietly. We have to help them, before they're lost forever. Celis nodded, her gaze now set on the distant horizon that no longer held any clear structure. Yes, we've opened the first door, but the others are fading. If we don't act soon, they will be erased, forgotten, wiped from existence. Cade felt the weight of that. He wasn't just a survivor anymore. He wasn't just trying to save himself. He was carrying the lives of countless others on his shoulders. How do we help them? There's no simple path, Celis replied. But we have the energy of time, of memory, and of reality itself now. We can reach out across the boundaries of what's left. Each reality has a different need, a different distortion. We can't just force our way in, but we can open gateways. Echo interrupted. I can assist. I can feel the fluctuations. There are patterns in the collapse. Each world that is fading has a trace, a weak point where time hasn't completely unraveled. I can help guide you, but you must act quickly. Cade nodded, understanding. He was no longer just a man in a fight for survival. He was part of something larger, a key to fixing what was broken. But Cade said, his voice filled with a new kind of resolve. Can we save them all? Can we really do this? There's only one way to know, Silas replied. We don't have all the answers yet, but we have each other, and we have the power to reshape what's been lost. It's up to us now. Cade's heart pounded as the full weight of his role became clear. This was only the beginning. The battle for the survival of countless worlds had only just begun. And for the first time in his life, Cade didn't feel the terror of the unknown. He felt the stirring of something else. Hope. With a final glance at Celis, Cade stepped forward, his heart steady. They were no longer bound by the constraints of their old reality. They were gatekeepers standing between worlds that had been forgotten and the ones that still had the chance to survive. Together they would open the gateways to the forgotten, and together they would change the course of time itself. As Cade and Celis stood at the threshold of forgotten worlds, the weight of their journey pressed upon them. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with infinite possibilities and dangers they could not yet understand. But there was no turning back. They had become part of something far greater than themselves, the gatekeepers of realities on the brink of extinction. Echo, now more human than ever, guided them as they navigated the fragmented landscapes of forgotten dimensions. The AI's once rigid logic had softened, now infused with the empathy and understanding of a being that had shared in Cade's and Celis's memories. It was a silent partner helping to open the gateways that would lead them to the worlds on the verge of being lost forever. In each reality, they found the remnants of civilizations, echoes of lives that had once thrived, now hanging by the thinnest threads of time. Cade could feel the power of their combined energy, time, and memory shaping the fabric of existence itself. Each world they touched was one step closer to restoring balance, to saving what remained from the grasp of Null Prime's destructive reach. But as they ventured deeper into the void, Cade knew the journey was far from over. The ultimate test awaited them, one that would challenge not just their strength, but their very understanding of existence. They were no longer just fighting to survive. They were fighting to preserve the fabric of reality itself, to protect the memories of those who had been lost. In the silence of the forgotten realms, they made their vow they would not let the past slip into oblivion. They would carry the weight of all that had been and all that was yet to be. Their journey had just begun.